Welcome to the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, wife, mother of two, and a homemaker by choice. Around here, slow living isn't a trend or an aesthetic, it's a lived seasonal rhythm, and it's a gentle revolution. In these episodes, I share reflections on living at a human pace, tending to our small home, growing food on a balcony and at the allotment, and finding joy in the ordinary days. This is a space to question default, to step out of the rush and to choose a quieter, more intentional way of living. If you're ready to join the unhurried revolution, then you're in the right place. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Slow Living Collective podcast. Today I'm diving into something that I'm actually really excited about, and it's going to be about choosing a life that other people wouldn't choose. And I want to begin this episode by naming something that I think often sits quietly underneath so many conversations about slow living, intentionality, choice. And that is the discomfort that arises when your life no longer mirrors what other people would choose for themselves. Not because your life is wrong, and not because theirs is wrong, but because difference, when it's lived honestly, has this real way of unsettling the stories we tell ourselves about what a good life is supposed to look like. And I think many people carry far more tension around this than they would like to admit. Now, there's kind of this unspoken expectation in modern life that our choices should be broadly recognisable, let's say, and ideally defensible. That if we make a different choice about work, family, home, pace, ambition, money, then we should be able to explain it in a way that reassures others that we haven't made a mistake and that our choices should make sense to them. But what I've learned slowly over the years and somewhat uncomfortably is that life doesn't need to be universally appealing to be deeply right for you. It only needs to be coherent to the person living it. I live a life that many people wouldn't choose. I home educate my children. I live in a small home by choice. I centre my days around my home, around rhythm, around presence rather than constant expansion. I identify myself as a homemaker, and I have opted out where I can, which is privileged, let me put that there, but I've opted out where I can of certain forms of visibility, productivity and pace, not as a rejection of modern life, but as a way of staying well inside it. And none of those choices are meant to be persuasive, they are simply mine. And I want this episode to be about you are allowed to choose a life that other people wouldn't choose without framing it as rebellion, without turning it into some kind of moral stance, and without needing to convince anyone else of its value. Because I truly believe that difference doesn't actually require a defence. And one of the reasons I think this can feel so charged is because so often we confuse disagreement with judgment. When someone wouldn't choose your life, it can feel like a commentary on your intelligence, your ambition, your worth, especially for women whose choices are so often read as statements rather than preferences. But someone else's inability to imagine themselves in your life is not a verdict on yours, and equally vice versa. Right, so a lot of stickiness I find comes when you share, like, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it, and people are like, yeah, I don't agree with that because my life doesn't look the same way. And by you living in your authentic truth and feeling, really passionate about the life you've chosen to live, that's making me ask some uncomfortable questions about myself. And I think sometimes the discomfort isn't really about disagreement at all. Sometimes it's about what your choices quietly stir up in someone else. When you live a way that's settled, deliberate, coherent, authentic, even if it's ordinary, small or unglamorous, it can act like a mirror. Not because you're doing anything wrong, because your life touches a question they haven't resolved for themselves. And when that happens, it's often easier to frame your choices as naive, regressive, responsible, or ideologically suspect than to sit with the unease they provide. And that reaction isn't evidence you need to explain yourself more clearly. It's evidence that your life has brushed up against something unfinished in them, and that work belongs to them, not to you. And I experienced this many years ago when I first started home educating my children. And I made a decision that I was going to home educate my children before my first one was born. It has been a long-standing decision and a way of life that we wanted for ourselves. And I shared like a funny meme about something that I would stand behind, actually. I believe the meme was about, something about children not being able to go to the toilet in school, not as freely as you say can at home. And something that I absolutely stand by, that I think is, really an unnecessary aspect in school. And this podcast isn't about home educating, but it was something along those lines. And I didn't say anything with it. I just shared it, and it was just something funny. And a friend in my real life, she took it, she didn't take it well. She didn't take it well at all. But it wasn't really the meme itself that she didn't take well. What she opened up was a very extensive rant that she had obviously been holding on to for a while, that wasn't overly coherent, didn't overly make a lot of sense, but came from a place where she was really angry with me that, I frame home education as a better choice. Now listen, I am very open with the fact that I think home education is the best choice for my children. Do I think it's the right choice for every child? No, I don't. Do I think that every child should be home educated? No, I don't. Do I think every parent has the capacity to home educate their child? No, I do not. Do I think some children are better off in school? Yes, I do. And so, but I'm always very open about that, and I always have been ever since day dot of home education. But this was obviously, there was something about my life that brushed against hers that rubbed it up the wrong way. It had obviously been building for quite some time. And this is someone I'd known for decades, by the way. This wasn't just some random on the internet. This was somebody I had known for decades. And, I read it and I was like, okay, okay. And I decided I'm not defending myself here, because I don't believe some aspects of the school system are healthy for our young people, and I stand behind that. And in front of it and to the side of it, I stand by it. It is not always the best place. Do I think it could be better in some areas? Absolutely, I do. However, that response was not really about that. Her response was some work that she hadn't done on herself, or that she felt guilty about. That's not my problem. Something in me and the way I live my life triggered her to such a degree that she couldn't even come to me as somebody she'd known for decades and say, hey, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about something. Can we talk about it? We didn't get to that point. We just had an overreaction on Instagram, and that was it. So I ummed and ahed for a bit. I read it, I sat with it, I reread it, sat with it again, and I decided I'm not responding to this. I've got nothing to say. There was nothing overly controversial in the first place. Something in my life is brushing up against yours. That's something unfinished in your life, something you need to work on, and that work belongs to you, not to me, and I am not getting involved in it. And so I didn't, which for me, someone who's extremely reactive, was probably one of the hardest things I had to do. I did first start, like frantic typing, and then I was like, oh, do you know what? I can't even be bothered. And, what am I going to defend myself for? I've made the choice that I think is the right choice for my children. If you've made a different one, then I presume you have done it with exactly the same kind of love, compassion, and everything else to make the best choice for your children and the best choice for your family. And if you aren't happy with that choice, that is not a me problem. You go away and work on that. So, someone's inability to imagine themselves in your life is not a verdict on your life. And it just simply means that they are responding from their own nervous system, just as you are, just as it should be. And, what looks like freedom to one person could look like suffocation to another. Listen, I will scroll my Instagram feed sometimes and feel like, no, that's not for me. No, that's not for me. I wouldn't want to live like that. But I don't comment on it, right? Because it's not my life and I just don't care. It's not my life. And I presume that the people in there, I hope the people in those lives are having just as much fun as I'm having in my life. And I'm sure that they are. But, what looks like safety to one person can look like limitations to someone else. And neither of the interpretations are wrong. They just need to be viewed in context. And I think the problem begins really when difference is flattened into sort of a hierarchy, when certain choices are sort of quietly positioned as more evolved or more enlightened, more liberated or more worthy of respect. And when we stop allowing, that and start ranking our lives by how closely they resemble the dominant narrative of success, productivity or progress, I think that's where so much unnecessary shame creeps in. And I've noticed that when people feel the need to justify their versions of their life loudly to you, it's often not because they're confident, it's because they're sort of like bracing for impact, because they've learned consciously or not that any kind of deviation invites scrutiny. And something I will get quite frequently when I talk about slow living, and you guys who are listening, you know this, I speak very candidly about slow living. I speak very candidly about many aspects of my life, but I've always maintained that slow living is not a thing. It's not a point you have to have certain criteria before you can start. It is just a different way of being for every different person's life. No two people's idea of slowing down their life will look the same because no two people have the same factors that go into their life. No, it's just not going to happen. And so, I've always been very candid about the fact that, what I'm telling you it probably is not going to be exactly the same for you. And I will often get sometimes little comments that are like, well, that's good for you, kind of thing. It's good for you that you can do that, but I'm really busy. And it's like, yeah, me too. But I'm showing you the parts where it feels a little easier for me and where I've chosen to try and weave slowness in. That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to show you that it doesn't matter what your life looks like. You can find space in it, and that's what's important. And as I always say, it's never ever gonna look the same. And we don't have this ideal roadmap. I don't know that we want some kind of ideal roadmap either. We're just here to actually do the work properly, not follow some trend or something like that. We're here to do the work properly, and in that, we hopefully we'll find a way of living that really works for us. But I want to remind you, you don't need to create a brand new life, right? And you don't need to worry if people are, butting up against it somehow. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to say this works for me because of this, or need to add caveats or preempt criticism, something I could do better with, right? I preempt the criticism. I try and feel like I know this is privileged. I know this because I know people. You can't just make a random statement on the internet without everybody coming for you. But you're allowed to let your life be specific. And this is especially true when it comes to pace, because some people really do thrive on momentum, expansion, stimulation, constant movement. But others need steadiness and repetition, things to feel more familiar and quiet to feel well. And neither is superior, but pretending otherwise or forcing yourself to live at a pace your nervous system can't sustain is where harm happens. And so choosing a smaller life doesn't mean you lack vision. Choosing a slower life doesn't mean you're afraid. Choosing a home-centered life doesn't mean you've abandoned your values or you've stopped growing. In fact, these choices for me, they're not about retreating. They're actually about staying regulated, staying present, connected to my children, my work that I do here, my values, but also my own limits, because my capacity isn't finite. And one of the most grounding realizations that I've had is that discomfort is not the same as danger. Just because someone feels unsettled by your choices doesn't mean those choices need correcting. Sometimes discomfort is simply the sound of someone else's internal assumptions or internal issues just being challenged. And if they don't like it, well, they don't have to. It's not your responsibility to resolve. It's not. It's really not. You don't need to shrink who you are or the way you live or your truth or your values to make it more palatable to other people. And you don't need to inflate it either to make it look more impressive. You don't need to package your life in any way to earn approval from people who aren't living it. So, you're allowed to choose a life that works quietly and works for you, one that doesn't translate well into sound bites, one that wouldn't make sense on paper to someone else. Somebody, a life that, isn't always that easy to get across in a text message or an email or a blog post. A life doesn't have to be aspirational to be meaningful. In fact, some of the most stable, nourishing lives I know are deeply unremarkable from the outside. They're ordinary, they're repetitive, and they're deliberately unoptimized. And they work not because they're perfect, but because they are honest. And if your life feels right to you, even if your choices would never be someone else's choices, that's not a failure at all. It is not a failure. And, doing that quietly and without spectacle is absolutely enough. And I hope today's episode showed you that, there are always going to be criticisms from other people. They are always going to have an opinion. You know what they say about opinions, right? This is a PG podcast, so I'm not going to say the rest. But you know what they say about opinions. Everyone's got one, right? And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they think. And if they have a strong opinion about the way you live, as long as you're not doing anything illegal, right? As long as you're not doing anything illegal, why does anybody care, right? That is the crux of it for me. I want to slow down. Sue me for it. And yeah, if people are truly triggered by the way you want to live your life and the way you want to ease your nervous system, that's not about you, sweetheart. That is about them. That is about the way they have come up against something in your life that is making them deeply uncomfortable. That is work they need to do. That is not work you need to do. So I hope that sticks with you. I hope you remember that today. As always, you can come find the full post along with the podcast episode that you've just listened to over on Substack. You can find me there, theslowlivingcollective.substack.com, and you can also find me on Instagram, which is @theslowlivingcollective. And I will catch you in my next episode.